Welcome to Provincial Vote 2024. I'm your host, Neil Godbout, Executive Director of the Prince George Chamber of Commerce. Today we have three candidates from Prince George-Valemount with us: Gwen Johansson, Clay Pootney, and Rosalind Bird. Welcome.
Thank you.
Let's get started right away. Clay, I have the first question for you.
All right.
Premier Eby has been sending mixed messages lately when it comes to the BC NDP's commitment to the carbon tax. Could you please clarify for us exactly what is your and your party's stance on the carbon tax?
Well, I believe the carbon tax is a federal mandate, and provincially we did enact it a long time ago under a different government. My stance is taking a hard look at it and seeing if it's doing its intended use, to see if it's helping or hurting British Columbians. So I know that they've taken a hard look at it, and I know they're looking at the big-time polluters to try to kind of balance this out as we move forward.
Gwen, what do you think of this? I know the BC Greens certainly have quite a lot to say on this topic.
We have a view, and the carbon tax was brought in originally by a small c Conservative government. It was the Gordon Campbell government. And it was at the time, and I understand still is, viewed by the economists of the world that that's the most efficient way to bring down emissions. So yes, and so if a government decides that they're going to remove it, then I think we have to ask them, what are you going to replace it with? So are you going to abandon the whole philosophy of we have to do something about emissions, or are we going to just move away and say, well, we'll just see what happens? And that's the most dangerous path as far as I'm concerned.
So what would, if you would replace it, what would you replace it with?
Well, that's the problem for whoever replaces it or removes it, because they have to come up with something that is better, and so far nobody has come up with anything, as far as I know, that is better. But yes, we believe that climate change is real, and we have to deal with it.
And so you and the BC Greens would keep the current carbon tax structure in place, or would you add to it?
Well, we certainly would. We would retain the carbon tax until we had something better, or somebody came up with a better way to deal with it. But we have to deal with climate change. I mean, it's pretty evident around the world that it's an extreme risk.
Rosalind, the BC Conservatives have certainly made their position on the carbon tax loud and clear. Would you be replacing it with anything?
We don't intend to replace it with anything. The carbon tax is extremely egregious. It is impacting, people across the entire province. It is pushing prices up, to a point where people are really, really struggling, and it is not reducing emissions. So it is being pushed in to supplement general revenue, and it's not being intended or used for its intended purpose, and it has a significant impact on everything across BC, and it needs to be removed. We need to make affordability, the priority in this province, and that's the first step in achieving that.
Can we do affordability and try and address climate change at the same time?
Absolutely.
How so?
Absolutely. Well, there's lots of ways that we can address climate change. I mean, climate change is a real thing. There's no doubt about that, and we're not disputing that. We're just choosing to look at it from a different lens. So there are lots of ways that we can reduce emissions, and we can protect our environment, air, land, and water sources. And those are the things that we're going to focus on in order to address that. But I don't think taxing people into poverty is going to change the weather. It isn't.
Right. Clay, last word to you on this topic based on what you've just heard.
Oh, well, there's a lot to it, and I know it affects us all. Climate change is a real thing. We're seeing it a lot up here, massive forest fires, new terms that are coming out, like heat domes. We've never seen this before in my lifetime. So it is taking a look at the big picture and seeing how, if it's the carbon tax is helping or hurting British Columbians, but we do have to move forward in a good way to address these things as well.
We'll move on to our next question. My next question is for you, Rosalind. I've heard several recent interviews with John Rustad where he talks about economic reconciliation with Indigenous communities. What does that look like to you for First Nations in North Central BC?
Well, our party is actually very committed to reconciliation. There is a narrative that we aren't. That's actually simply not true. We would like to work with First Nations closely. We want to look at mechanisms that are going to promote their culture, that are going to have them feel inclusive, and we want to make sure that their communities are well supported. So we need to look at how we are going to use our resources and extract those resources that they benefit all British Columbians. And that includes First Nations and non-First Nations communities.
Gwen, your thoughts?
We've had a lot of interaction with the First Nations, and I've been involved in that in the Northeast. And it's they have a right to be able to continue to use their land for their hunting and their fishing and their cultural activities, and they need to be able to share in the resource extraction if there is some. And there's a lot of examples where that hasn't happened in the past, and it's only fair that we bring them in. And they're doing that now, and they are getting more control over the land and where the oil and gas industry operates and so on, and that's a good thing. So we are moving in the right direction, but it's awfully slow.
Clay, your thoughts, particularly as this pertains to UNDRIP?
We've been in a very good direction for quite some time to have First Nations inclusion in major projects. It benefits everybody in the community, so working together with all of these parties ensure certainty, which will bring economic growth and investors to the area. We've seen that happen a lot. When everybody's on board, we're seeing a lot of major projects move forward. So First Nations are a major part of what's happening up here, and there should be a massive inclusion as well. When First Nations are a part and they're shareholders, there's certainty, and they're bringing more money into the community as well, because money's not going anywhere. It's not being shipped anywhere, it's staying local.
Rosalind, last word to you on this topic, but I did mention UNDRIP, and I should clarify for our viewers that UNDRIP, the United Nations Declaration for the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, John Rustad has made it clear that he's not in support of that. So how does this, I guess, all tie in between UNDRIP and economic reconciliation?
Okay, so it's not UNDRIP. Here in BC, we have DRIPA, which is the Declaration of Indigenous Rights Act, and we would like to make amendments and or repeal that act. But it's not because we don't agree with UNDRIP. We just feel that the legislation is complex and that it actually puts road barriers and it puts roadblocks up in actually having good, solid relations with First Nations communities. And so we're trying to reduce those roadblocks, not increase them.
Right. Okay. We'll be right back with our next round of questions. Welcome back to Provincial Vote 2024. Next question is for Gwen Johansson. With 22 years' experience in municipal politics, you know that local government pay for policing in their communities. So what are you and your party's plans to work on behalf of the communities in your riding with the federal government to address chronic violent and nonviolent offenders?
That's a huge problem, and because we always deal with the symptoms, we never deal with the base core of how we got here. And I think that we can do some things on the surface, like we can make sure that there is housing for people that are homeless. We can make sure that that if there are offenders that are habitual, that we deal with them and they don't get out on the streets. But at the core, we need to go back to the fundamentals and find out why we have all this problem. Because human beings are not born to do the things that we're seeing right now. So there's some big issues in behind that. We need to start to deal with that. And the vast difference between the very rich and the very poor, with that gap growing, that's one of the big issues, I think.
Rosalind, your thoughts on chronic offenders?
Well, we certainly are familiar with that here in Prince George and across the province. It's been a huge issue, particularly in the last couple of years. And that results from a number of things. the NDP has some pretty radical policies currently. They decriminalized narcotics and drug use, opened up public places for those types of things, which has increased, crime across our province. I don't believe our police are well supported currently, and it's something that we need to change. So we need to find more funding for police. We need to look at our judges and how they're appointed, and what sort of our correction system in general actually we need to have a good look at that. I think that our parole policies and our correction institutions need to be reviewed, and we need to find better programs to assist people to not reoffend.
How much can we do as a provincial government, because many of the things you're talking about are federal jurisdiction?
Well, I think those are conversations that we need to have, and I think when the government changes, if the government changes this fall, those are relationships that we need to build. I mean, we have a very good opportunity to change the federal government coming up this fall, and I think those relationships need to be rebuilt, and I think we need to be looking at governance from all levels that supports all residents of BC and the betterment of Canada as a whole.
Clay, your thoughts?
Well, I do believe safety is paramount, and I know we have taken action on pieces like that. Decriminalization was a piece to get more police force out there. I do know that federally, we've called on the federal government to look at our ports, what's coming in. And there's so many other issues that link into this. I know there's the housing crisis, global inflation plays a big part of just everything. That's like a really big question, and it's looking locally to work with a lot of the organizations locally to identify what's going on and then take action to ensure that our people are safe.
Clay, my next question is also for you, and this question comes from the McBride Chamber of Commerce. Why is it so important to be teaching sexual orientation and gender identity in classrooms when so many graduating students today are lacking the basics in reading, writing, and math needed to enter the workforce?
That piece actually isn't mandated for curriculum. That's mandated for anti-bullying. So that piece is actually giving teachers and school systems a tool to use for anti-bullying within the classrooms. So that piece is majorly for anti-bullying, which all our kids it's affected with, and everyone deserves a place of learning where they don't have to go there and feel discriminated against.
Rosalind, your thoughts?
The SOGI curriculum, whether you call it curriculum or you call it an anti-bullying program, we need to engage stakeholders on this. So it includes teachers, it includes parents, it includes students, it includes councils, like student councils, school boards, and we need to have a discussion. There is a lot of concern about this in community, and I'm hearing it at the doors. I have parents bring it up all of the time, and they're extremely concerned that their parental rights are being removed. And they are not convinced and do not understand that this is a bullying program. And so we need to actually look at what is actually being instructed or being brought to students at school and determine whether or not it is or isn't appropriate. Now, that being said, every student should feel safe and welcomed at school and should have resources and supports available to them that if they're struggling with something, that they can reach out.
Now, to be clear, the BC Conservative platform calls SOGI indoctrination. Do you subscribe to that?
What I subscribe to is that parents are extremely concerned. And that's what we're hearing at the doors. There's a lot of confusion, and it varies from school to school what that information, like I'm being told it's not curriculum, but that's not what I'm being told at the doors.
Right.
So I think we need to have a really good look at what it is exactly that students are being taught and exposed to in schools.
Gwen, your thoughts?
I think that involvement of the parents is really important. It's really important to get the parents to come into the school and maybe sit in on the classrooms. I spend a lot of time in classrooms, and if it's key if you can get the parents and the teachers and the students kind of working together. And it is critical, I think, that we include the parents, and so that they get a first-hand look at what's going on, because often they feel that they're outside of what's happening in the school. We need to bring them in and we need to work with them, and that's when it becomes successful.
Thank you. Next question is for Rosalind. This question is also from the McBride Chamber of Commerce. What are you going to do to get non-vaccinated healthcare workers back to work, and how will that help the current healthcare crisis?
Well, the Conservative Party of BC has already said that we will return unvaccinated workers to the healthcare system. In fact, it's a priority of ours. People shouldn't be removed from their jobs, particularly in any setting, actually, due to a personal choice that they made regarding their own health. And so the fact that that happened in the past is not something that we want to repeat. And we want to honor those people that, you know, made personal choices, and we need them back in the workforce. So we would absolutely welcome them back. We have a massive shortage of healthcare workers across our province, and you know, due to some of the policies that the current government has put in place, you know, we have long wait times, we have a shortage of doctors, we have ERs closing. You know, this has had a huge impact across the province, and we need to really, you know, we need to find healthcare workers, we need to support healthcare workers, and we need to find a way to bring health services back to BC residents, because right now they're struggling.
Gwen, what are your views?
So the healthcare problem is huge. It's very difficult to find a doctor, for instance. As far as focusing down on whether it's all laid at the feet of the people who were not able to work because of the ruling on vaccines, I'm not sure that that's a major part of the problem. I think that there are some more fundamental issues than that. But at the same time, I understand that a lot of them are coming back to work now, and so they're gradually coming back into the system. So that, you know, that's a good thing. But that doesn't solve the issue of healthcare in British Columbia. And I think one of the things that I've been very interested in is the work that the former Federal Minister of Health did, Jane Philpott, and she has a book out, and she outlines actually the theory that she has of how we could solve it, and it is that when we move to a new community with children, we don't wonder whether they're going to be able to go to school. It's automatic that they will be able to find a placement in the school system. And she makes the comparison to the healthcare system and suggests that maybe that's the way that we should go. We should have community clinics under a local board, and they would be responsible for the healthcare within that community. And I think that that's the way we should go with healthcare.
Clay, finally, your views.
We did repeal that mandate, so we have a lot of nurses coming back, but at the same token, it's a big challenge to have this, especially rurally. And I know that the NDP has done things like incentives, like the rural nurse incentive. We're training nurses, we're training doctors as we're building hospitals and adding additions to other hospitals. So the problem's been identified, and we're now taking action. And I know that John Rustad has claimed that he will be putting cuts to healthcare. So we can't afford things like that. We actually have to invest in our communities, and especially the rural communities where we're seeing a lot of that take place, where people, like you said, don't have doctors, nurses, pieces like that. Incentives, pieces to drive more people into the rural communities where they're very beautiful as well, to attract the right type of people to join those communities.
A follow-up question that was asked when Adrian Dix was here earlier in the summer to announce the hospital expansion was, that's all fine and good that, right, there's doctors and nurses being trained, but is there enough doctors and nurses being trained?
Exactly.
Was the question.
That's a big piece. We have opened a lot more seats to schools, and things do take time. So on the sidelines, there is a vetted process to bring international nurses and doctors in as well. So they're looking at all facets to bring people in. The problem's been here for quite some time, and it takes a while to take action on that. Previous governments have, cut a lot of funding to places, and we're really trying to move ahead and invest in our people again.
We'll be right back after a quick break. Welcome back to Provincial Vote 2024. Our next question is for Gwen. Major credit agencies have said they are concerned by BC's planned deficits for the next 3 years, which will drive the provincial debt much higher. Do you and the BC Greens have a plan to balance the budget, and if so, how and when?
Well, that'll be released when the Greens put out their platform, and I don't have authority to go and expose anything about it now. But the debt problem in British Columbia is real, and a lot of people don't realize the debt that is holding that's not reported that BC Hydro has, because BC Hydro has a system of accounting that allows them to defer debt. So the bill comes in, it gets paid, but on the books it becomes it's assigned to a deferral account. In the turn, sort of around the 2000s, there was one deferral account, made a lot of sense. When Hydro had a really good year, they would put money into that account. When they had a bad year, then they had something to draw from, and that way we didn't end up with a yo-yo rates, having to be changed all the time. But those have ballooned over the last number of years, and the last time I looked, there was about 27 of them. I think now I'm told they're over 30. So I think we need to start looking at that, because that is a deferral. It is not referred to as a debt, and but that is because they're saying, well, the ratepayers will have to pay it in the future, but there's no plan as to how we're going to eliminate that, and it's in the billions of dollars.
Clay, your perspective on the deficit and the debt.
It's a huge challenge, I know, to everybody with balancing the books. I know investing into people does cost money, and I do know previously we've had a lot of crises in BC, forest fires, things like this that have ballooned the debt right up. So it's finding solutions to these pieces and looking at corporate taxation and all of these, and not trying to take it out of the pockets of everybody in BC. We have to look at good solutions to make sure that we're just not strangling the pocketbooks of every British Columbian.
Rosalind, your thoughts?
Well, we are strangling pocketbooks of British Columbians. The NDP government has brought in 33 or increased 33 taxes over the last number of years. The debt that we are accumulating is terrifying, particularly as to who's going to pay it off. It's going to be our children and our grandchildren. We currently have a government that is just willing to spend instead of looking where they should be spending. Healthcare is an excellent example. I was just said, my colleague just made a comment that we're going to cut money from healthcare. We're not going to cut money from healthcare. We're going to put it and towards frontline workers instead of administration. So this is something we need to take a very hard look at, and we need to figure out how we're going to manage this in years coming, because we're in big trouble if we continue down the path we're going. And if I manage my budget at home the way the current government is managing their budget, I would be in big trouble.
Clay, next question is for you. While you were the elected chief of the Lheidli-T'enneh First Nation, CKPG reported that you had urged School District 57 to support a request to the Ministry of Education to set aside 2 school board seats for Indigenous representation. If you and the NDP form government, would you push the Education Minister for this, and why?
And once again, it depends on where the First Nations are at with their education pieces, because at the time, we were at 33% grad rates for our First Nations, and that was us in McLeod Lake First Nation. And so we were pushing for those seats to be a piece of the solution process, because what can we do to get First Nation students to the level that everybody else is at? So that was a big push at the time. I would work with all the local First Nations to see where they're at with the education for their kids, to see what path they want to go on to deliver, great education and great opportunities for their members.
But would that involve actual elected Indigenous representation on the school board?
If they were pushing for it, I would be looking into it for sure.
Gwen, would you like to see that?
I think it's a good idea, but you have to have willingness on the part of the First Nations to want to do that. And some of them probably would, but on the other hand, they've found some avenues, and their graduation rates have increased, and they're moving on into the secondary and post-secondary education. So they have found some avenues to increase the education success rate, and so whether they would choose to try and do it through a school board or not, I think is up to them.
Rosalind, your thoughts?
I think it's an interesting idea, but I don't think it's absolutely necessary. I think school boards should be focused on helping all students. Currently, we have a huge issue in our education system with our graduating students. A lot of them are illiterate and can't read and write and can't complete basic math problems, and they need to actually upgrade when they are moving to post-secondary institutions. So I think we need to look at our education system through our school boards and see what we're going to do to improve success rates for all students across the board. Rural communities, very similar to First Nations communities, also struggle with education challenges. They often don't have enough teachers to teach subjects that may be required for specialty programs, so we need to figure out how we can get the right education to the students to get them into the programs that they want. We need to have a robust and well-educated future prepared. We have huge issues in a number of sectors that we can't find people that are well qualified for those jobs, and we need to make sure that we have an education system that is setting up our youth and our young people that they can do what they want and support their communities moving forward.
Thank you, Rosalind. We'll be right back after this quick break. Welcome back to Provincial Vote 2024. My next question is for Rosalind. Your party platform says useless and redundant regulations need to be removed, with larger corporations being held accountable if they engage in unfair or anti-competitive practices. So if elected, which useless regulations would you remove first to help small and medium-sized businesses? And what exactly do you plan to do to hold large corporations accountable?
Well, that's a rather complex question,
I'm sorry.
and I'm not sure there's a simple answer to that one. Actually, it's rather multifaceted. So I think we need to look at legislation that actually, has negatively impacted our economy in the last few years, and we need to figure out how to do that better. I honestly don't know what that looks like specifically. That is something that I would have to talk to John about. However, one thing we do need to do in regards to, you mentioned small and medium business, those are things that we can actually do at a local and provincial level quite quickly. We need to make sure that small and medium businesses are well supported, because they're actually the ones that hold up our economy when we have challenges. So currently forestry and mining are being slowed down or held up by the current government policies. And so it's small and medium business are the ones that keep our communities moving forward and thriving. And so they've had a number of challenges with, the cost of goods and everything has gone up, but we have labor shortages. They have increased costs due to some of the issues that we're seeing downtown here in Prince George and across our province. So they have a lot of expenses that they have had put on them in the last few years due to crime, homelessness, and addictions, and how that's impacting their businesses. So we need to find mechanisms to keep them strong and growing and supporting their local communities.
Clay, your thought on supporting business?
Small and medium business are, like you said, they are phenomenal in our area. We have a lot of different businesses propping up. And I know provincially, we have always supported small business, big business. Has to actually, when they come in, do things responsibly. And I know that provincially we have to work federally as well because there's a lot of things that they do that impact us with global inflation and other pieces that will impact our province. So it's kind of bringing everyone together and hopefully finding the solutions to ensure that everybody's taken care of at the lower level with small business. A lot of startups, pieces like this, we have to support people that want to throw their name in to be entrepreneurs. Moving forward, I believe the NDP government is the one that has supported these businesses the most.
Rosalind brought up earlier about increased taxes and regulations and fees for businesses brought in by the NDP government. How do you reconcile that?
Well, it's taking a look all over the place to see where that was, what was happening, and if it's affecting us up here or major cities or what's happening. And like I said, trying to find the solutions to ensure that our small businesses stay strong.
Gwen, last word to you on supporting business.
Well, I believe that there's a role for better regulation of the corporate sector. You could look at what we call the captured regulators. The ones that are working with the major industries rather than regulating them. And I think we've got some of that going on in British Columbia, certainly with the forest sector and with the oil and gas sector. That's one thing. And another thing is I think that there should be some sort of control over the movement between the corporate sectors and the regulators, because we have seen, I think, some questionable movement between the industry and the government, or the government and or the regulators. And we have, you've got in the forestry industry, you had the lady who moved from regulating or setting the rules for the forest industry here, and when she leaves, she goes to Britain to a major company that she was regulating before, or setting up industry for and regulations. And so there's that, and there is the gradual aggregation that's going on. So you have a lot of companies that start out and they grow to a certain level. Maybe the founder has ended up getting to the point where he wants to retire, so he wants to sell, and then you have this aggregation going on until the companies that were local are now owned by somebody in New York or Toronto or wherever. And so when you get the distance between the owner and the actual operations on the ground, when you lose local control, there's a major problem there, and I think that's something to look at.
Gwen, the last question is for you, and it's coming from my friends at the McBride Chamber of Commerce, and it specifically pertains to the Robson Valley. If elected, what would you do to make sure the land in the agricultural land reserve that isn't suitable for farming be made available so that more homes can be built to improve affordability and availability?
Well, there is a problem with the agricultural land reserve. I mean, it was a broad brush thing when it was brought in, and I think that the intent at that time was to go around and fine-tune, and I don't think the fine-tuning ever occurred. So there's that could be done, and then it becomes it's a problem between those who want to sell their land that maybe they farmed for a long time, but they need some money for their retirement. And so there needs to be a way developed, and I think it lays through making sure that those who are farming the land can make a living from farming the land, because the system that we've had for a long time is that, well, you farm the land on your weekends and you end up going and getting a day job in order to make a living. And so I think we need to solve that part, and then that would sort out the land that was appropriate for farming and the land that is not appropriate.
Clay, your thoughts is on the ALR as it pertains to the Robson Valley?
As it pertains to them, it's listening to what their needs are and then going to government and seeing how we can make that better. Essentially, ALR land, from what I know, can be transferred into different areas, so that might be an option. but it is working with the community to move ahead with what they need.
All right, Rosalind.
I think the ALR needs to be reviewed along with the Agricultural Land Commission also. There are some major challenges in the Robson Valley with ALR land, one of them being foreign buyers purchasing farmland. You know, we have an agricultural land reserve for a reason, and that is to protect our food security and to grow our food and to grow beef, to grow chickens, to grow pork. You know, that's what supplements us day to day, and we need to be able to protect that. That being said, local governments need to have more ability to know what is best for their community. And I would agree, running massive large farms right now is extremely challenging due to the very high cost of things. So if we can reduce farm sizes, but still produce, you know, still have solid agriculture production, then maybe that's something that we need to look at. And McBride in particular, they would love to have more young families come and join their community. And so I think there are ways that the provincial and the municipal governments and regional districts can work to make that happen.
We're going to give each of you about a minute to wrap up our election special with just a 1 minute where you get to speak specifically to the voters about why they should put their trust in you and your party on October 19th. Let's start with you, Gwen.
Well, I think that one of the core values of the Green Party is participatory democracy. And I think what we've seen in British Columbia is a decline in, I was shocked actually to see that in one party, although those people had been elected by their constituencies to send a candidate, and then all of a sudden in one fell swoop, one individual could say, no, we're going to withdraw everybody. And so I think that we need to have a look at how things are, the democratic process that we have in the province. And I don't think that should happen. And it's not just one party, because, you know, we've seen other parties where there was a leadership opening, and one was sort of the chosen candidate, and then when somebody else came in who was challenging that and was doing very well, they had a process that they came up with that they could eliminate that person. So I think we have become quite smug in maybe Canada and particularly BC, where we sort of gloat that we've got this great democratic process, but I think we have some challenges there, and we should be careful about that.
Clay, your final thoughts.
Final thoughts. Right now, the NDP is on a really good trajectory. Whenever the NDP is in, we're always seeing hospitals get built, schools get built, roads get built. They're looking out for every British Columbian moving forward. They've always been a blue-collar party, and we're the people who built this beautiful province. So moving forward, we need to keep this trajectory, we need to keep this steam going. So that's why I'm looking to run for the NDP and represent.
Rosalind.
Well, I'm excited about being a member of the Conservative Party. They have a different leadership style, and one of the things John is very passionate about is having his MLAs represent their constituents and not follow a party line or follow the leader's take or role. I think that's something that is important currently. Gwen mentioned that. You know, we have not participated in including everybody in legislation and policy in the last few years, and I think that's something that needs to return. I think there has been a shift where the government thinks that we work for them, when in actual fact that they work for us, and I think we need to rebuild that trust and that relationship. I also think we have an opportunity to create better relationships with different levels of government, and that we need to be working together and not against. And so I believe our party can do that, and you know, we want to unify BC. We're tired of seeing divisional type politics and narratives. And I'm very excited about being able to rebuild relationships and trust with government.
Thank you, Rosalind. That wraps up our election special with the candidates from Prince George-Valemount, Gwen Johansson with the BC Greens, Clay Pootney with the BC NDP, and Rosalind Bird with the BC Conservatives. I'd like to thank all the candidates for taking part. I'm Neil Godbout, the Executive Director of the Prince George Chamber of Commerce. Good night.